right, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome once again to the proposal review session of the Tax Revision Commission. This is our fifth and potentially final time talking about individual proposals. Just want to acknowledge Carolyn and Yeshua are on the line, along with folks in the room. Today we're going to be talking about both proposals that are new, that we newly sent to you a few days ago, and we'll hopefully talk about some leftovers from that were previously in packages that were sent to you, but that we didn't get to. It's a lot of proposals still on the table, and I'm going to suggest, as I said in my email, that to be efficient, there are some proposals that we may be able to deal with today without extended discussion. And in a minute, I'll give you a chance to respond to that suggestion. And then of the remaining proposals, we're going to try to batch them where possible, because I think there's a number of places where they go together. We can have a single discussion about several proposals at once. And with all that, I'm hoping we can talk about them all today. As usual, as in past meetings, we'll try to break at around the 60 or 65 minute mark, say around 2 o'clock or a little bit after that. And hopefully I try to wrap up by 3:30. Next week, we've got, Tony and I are doing one-on-ones with members of the commission on Monday and Tuesday and on Thursday. Then on Friday, we'll have a final discussion of proposals, and that's the time when I think we can do a few things. First, we will share back with all of you a document that tries to capture, to the extent that it's capturable, what we've heard in terms of commission sentiment around different proposals. What are commissioners generally more warm towards, what they warm towards, what they cold towards, really as a way to stimulate discussion and refocus us on places of divergence and see if we can talk things through and find some common ground on at least some of them. We'll also come back to you with some revisions. There are a number of places where you guys have said, well, what if we did it this way? What if we did it this way? Or what if we did things in combination? We'll try to come back to you with some perspective on some of those ideas. We've got to try to help you start to think from a more holistic perspective. Becky and Richard and Mike and I put together a little table. It's not perfect, but it's a way to get on one page a bunch of different ideas organized more or less by the 4 policy principles that we agreed to earlier this year.
This is so cool.
And is that helpful? You know, I was a little selective. I didn't want to put every single proposal on the page because there are some that just didn't seem to be simulating a lot of discussion. And the revenue estimates are very approximate, partly because we're still gathering numbers, and partly because in a lot of cases there was multiple alternatives on the table and we hadn't really settled on them. So I think it's just one step in the direction of trying to bring some order to the many ideas that we have talked about.
This is very helpful.
Yeah, and I think that obviously we're distributing it in a public meeting, so we will put it on the website, but if you guys see anything that you're like, well, that just doesn't seem right, feel free to flag. Next, and then in a couple of weeks, we will have a town hall on November 6th. We've already got, I think, 45 registrants. 52 folks have registered to speak at that, and the idea there is that it will be a chance for stakeholders, members of the public, to speak on proposals that we've been talking about, or generally on the tax code. And then our goal is that by November 14th, we'll be able to present to you a package, a chairman's mark for discussion. And hopefully then over the next sessions after that, we will be able to get through to presenting recommendations to the council by the end of December.
I should know this, but are all of these also available on the website?
Say again?
All of these proposals, are they available on our website?
Yeah, so all of the proposals now are on the website. There's a tab on the website labeled proposals that people can sort. So they should all be available. They do, but those proposals write-ups don't reflect like iterations we've talked about. Those are the same. 99% of the time, those are exactly the same as what you saw.
And at the public hearing, do we expect that people will come and have a point of view on
That's my hope, is that people will focus their remarks on the proposals at hand rather than sort of going off and, I mean, we've had lots of chances for people to comment generally on what they want to say about the text.
We assume that people go in and they'll look at proposal, well, I don't know what it's called, but the increase for deduction for public school teacher expenses, and they'll give their point of view.
That's my hope. It's also an option for people to submit comments in writing. We extended that to the day after the town hall so that anybody who, if they get a chance to fully get their word in. They can submit things in writing.
I just have a question along Jody's line. Is it possible that we could ask the registrants if there are specific proposals that they have interest in? Is that a possibility?
Yeah, absolutely. Are we collecting that information in the registration process? We're collecting that process in the registration process. So we will go into the meeting with a list of not only who's registered, but to the extent, I mean, they don't have to say, but to the extent.
I agree, but I'm just saying to the extent that we can gather that data, that will be great, yes.
We will gather that data, and we will be talking to Ray, our facilitator for the evening, about the structure, but I think we're thinking about trying to group the conversation so it's not totally scattered all over the place, so that, okay, now we're going to be mostly talking about proposal, whatever, number 20. Now we're mostly going to be talking about income tax proposals.
I think we should also ask, as a matter of protocol before the meeting, where the person, does the person live in a district, have an investment in the district, do business? It could be advocacy in the district, but I think in terms of truth in lending and transparency, it would be good to know, because a lot of people on all the different sides use the district as their kind of like stage for their own shows. It'd be just good to know who's providing testimony and what stake they have in the game. Whether
we're collecting some of that information, right?
Yeah, and what ward you're from, what organization.
Yeah, we asked them what ward and what organization. And we haven't specifically said you can't testify if you don't live in the district.
And then, secondly, as we get them rolling, just to say by way of preamble, we've had the kind of overture. It's time now to take some positions. Don't just give us a general rap about your view of the world. You got that kind of where do you stand on some of these specific proposals is more helpful. I mean, unless other commissioners disagree with me, where we are.
You mean at the public hearing?
Yeah.
No, that's right. That's what I just want to make sure that we're going to, I agree with you. I agree 100%. Sorry.
Yeah.
Do you feel like people will know that this is what's wanted of them?
So we need to get that word out.
Yeah, we need to communicate to them. We have sent a pretty clear signal that the town hall is for the purposes of commenting on proposals. We probably could sharpen that message.
When you say you sent that, who you sent it to?
So it went out in our newsletter, and we have a reminder going out next week. And you all should be on the newsletter list. You should feel free to forward that to any stakeholders you think might be interested. I would say we've got a lot of people asking questions like, what's the format of this going to be? And so I think we've got.
And we've shared it on social media.
It's on social media, it's on Twitter and
The
LinkedIn.
people who signed up are pretty serious, like several journalists, and then a lot of people from the stakeholder groups who came. So they've now had the chance to look at the proposals.
When a journalist comes, are they coming to listen or are they coming to?
I don't know. I guess it just seems like people are taking this town hall
Yeah,
a lot more
I mean,
seriously than the previous ones.
We invited people to register just for a seat in the room, not necessarily register
Yeah.
to speak.
Got it.
I think we haven't sort of figured out how to separate those groups. We also have a little bit of an issue that we don't have a room that fits more people than if everybody who registered came, we'd be right at capacity.
Yeah.
We're still several weeks out, so we may have to do a little work to figure out how to triage. either find a different space. Yes, sir?
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. If there are journalists and they ask questions, who is the appropriate party who can respond on behalf of the commission?
My inclination is not to take questions. This is really a chance for people to weigh in and ask. I mean, we can, if maybe, I actually didn't realize there was journalists on the list. I haven't looked carefully at the list, but we should probably reach out to them in advance and say, look, if you have questions about where we are in the process, let's talk about those.
But at an appropriate point,
Yeah, this is not,
you,
it's not a press
well,
conference.
obvious, well, I think it's obvious, at some point, we have to have a briefing for the media.
Yeah.
And I would argue the editorial board of the Washington Post, there's only editorial board left, to brief them on what we have come up with. But there's an argument that we should have a briefing for the media and the Washington Post editorial board on what we are, just our general course of events. Because you could argue that would be a way to get more public engagement in what we're doing. Because, as we all know who've been around the block, what's I hope doesn't happen, but could happen is, people won't come to the hearings, they won't be involved, and then we'll come up with something and they'll scream about how they didn't know and no one told me, and
Yeah.
Mayor, is there a chance for us to, I think having
Speak up a little bit.
I think there's, an open mic night is great for folks to come and kind of tell us where they are, but I think whatever the final proposals, before we make an official recommendation to the council, we should post our comments, the proposals online, and give people a chance to comment similar to a rulemaking.
Totally agree.
There may be, I don't feel that, and maybe others disagree, but I don't feel like I have had both sides in a robust dialogue on many of these proposals sufficient to understand what I would be recommending. There will be experts out there who can. And so I think we should build in time for a sufficient comment period where people can submit comments online on our final recommendation, and then we reconvene and take those things into account. I just don't know enough about some of these.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that's kind of notice and comment thing, collaboration. Yeah, that was
Similar to what works with the DC Register and our rulemaking process.
So remind me again of the calendar. November 6th, we have the public hearing. Then when do we think we'll be at a point to post these to get comments?
I would love to be able to share with you what we've been calling internally a chairman's mark. That is a package that Tony thinks can potentially, with consensus from this group. And I would love to be able to share that with all of you November 14th. It's a really short timeline. We have a meeting scheduled for November 14th. We have another meeting scheduled for November 28th. And we have another meeting scheduled for the first week of December 7th, I think. Somewhere in there, we'll have to share something with you all, get your buy-in, just agree that that's what we want to get comments on, put it up for comment, get comments back, and then take those comments into account.
I don't want to further delay us from getting started today, but to say, I think all of that's great, but what's almost as important is the preamble to our recommendations to say, what are we assuming about the economy over the next 10 years? And to stress to people, we don't anticipate this all being voted on and passed the first day. This is something that's going to last perhaps over 10 years. And if you take these items individually, they may not make as much common sense as the sum of all the whole, right? And so there's just a lot of context that people need to look at it, because people will undoubtedly find one thing they hate and one thing they like a lot. We better encourage them to look at the totality of it and the reasoning behind it as well.
Yeah, and I think next Friday's conversation will be we've already had some conversation about how these different pieces all fit together. I think next Friday's conversation will be helpful, because I agree that the recommendations can't just be a laundry list of individual proposals like this. It's not just going to be, I'm going to take half of these proposals and here's the ones.
No, I agree. I agree and I don't agree. I agree that, we should have a long-term horizon, because we should be looking at, we're 10-year iterations, so we should be looking at the big picture. That said, I don't want people to think that we're just saying, well, this is just, you know, the first movie of Star Wars. We got 9 more to go, so if we don't like this, to stand by, we got another one. I think we should, I, for one, really want to see that our recommendations are implemented by the council.
Right.
Sure, but not all in 2024 necessarily, is my point. But yeah,
The idea is to give them the recommendations in February, which is on the dawn of the budget process. The mayor won't submit a budget support act for another month because there'll be 6 or so weeks for her to digest. So if we build in a public comment period in our review and final recommendation, I think that gives us plenty of time. And, you know, I think it would also bolster the process. The more, you know, we have insights into the general public view of these recommendations, I think it bolsters the recommendation.
I agree, and I'm noticing we're already starting to get much more sharper, more pointed comments on a lot of these proposals, which is helpful too.
Mr. Chairman, I think, can I just make an observation? I think this is super helpful, and I'm looking and aligning it with the requirements by the council. And there is a specific, you know, our recommendations, number 4 would be should encourage business growth and job creation.
Yeah.
And I see this reduce and streamline business licensing fees as a positive, and I see a decreased real commercial property tax rates. But just generally speaking, as you, Mr. Chairman, and the staff come up with a markup, there may need to be some supplemental, because it doesn't really feel like balanced. If our existentialist crisis is how we keep this golden goose alive, we may need to consider additional options than just those 2.
I totally agree.
I totally agree.
We don't see this as, you know, exclusive. If there are additional contributions that can be made, I think they need to be made. And I, for one, I think this business activity tax, I'm kind of personally interested in that, because I think there's a lot of potential there in terms of eliminating loopholes, getting people to pay who aren't. What the horror story in my mind personally would be, get more people to pay and then we just spend the money. To me, get more people to pay their fair share, but use that to attract more investment to do what we expect government to do.
I agree. And that's why I think a wider comment section can help inform what it is we are in fact recommending. So we don't put something before the council and they get slammed at a hearing and like, well, what did that bozo tax commission really do in terms of vet these proposals? That's it.
And to that point, David, I think it would be very helpful if we could get those ideas in sooner rather than later, if you want staff input or you want, see what I mean? So there's a little bit of a chicken and egg, because if something comes in the day before the comment period closes and it's like this great sounding idea, but we don't have a chance to digest it and analyze it, it's going to be a little harder for us to give it the council as informed perspective as you want.
I understand, but I think that we are at a disadvantage because there's kind of a standing army of nonprofits who just generate ideas, and the rest of us have day jobs, if I'm honest. And so we just don't have it. I expected the staff, to be honest with you, Mayor, I expected the staff to produce a laundry list of recommendations that was widespread, that aligned with what we were supposed to submit to the council. I didn't realize at the dawn of this that, you know, some nonprofit can make a recommendation outside of our earshot, and all of a sudden it appears before us. I expected the staff to give us balanced recommendations on how we could accomplish this. It was never made clear to me, unless I missed something, that it was my job to do the research and come up with the proposals. Did I miss that? I just didn't expect that.
I would say that at the stakeholder meetings, you know, there were a lot of business groups that did testify and provide ideas. A lot of those ideas, there did end up in proposals.
I understand that.
CIA, you know.
But I will say, and Nick, I addressed this with you last week. I do think that we are not encouraging in these proposals more participation in the job, in the workforce, nor are we going after more business and making this a place, a city that is more business friendly, that will broaden our tax bases. I don't see proposals that are working to broaden our tax basis. I only see proposals that, as a citizen and somebody who lives here, that says it is this highly unattractive place for me to keep living and doing business. And I want to be honest, because I'm just coming from a meeting where I found out one of my retailers is going to Northern Virginia and done, closing the doors, and I'm gonna have them there on November 6th to tell but I want to make it purposeful about why it's too expensive for them to do business here. But this is exactly what I said, we're not encouraging more job formation or scalable rate that actually brings more people and broadens our tax basis. Because I'm just not sure we're gonna be able to tax our way out of what's ahead of us. And I do think we should have a long view, which means the next couple of years may be painful, but if we really want to have a longer view for the city, we can't tax our way out. And that's what this is. This is a proposal, sorry, from where I sit, to try to tax our way out versus broaden the base.
I have to say, I think that's a really unfair way to characterize both the work that the staff have done and the list of proposals here. First of all, we worked really hard to pull in lots and lots of stakeholders into the room back in the spring for them to articulate directly to us what they needed to see from the tax code to be competitive. We heard a lot of ideas, and there are a lot of those ideas that are reflected here. There's also a lot of ideas that they came in that we took up directly with OTR, and we discovered they had already been implemented. But there are a number of ideas that are here, and we can go through and tick them off if that would be helpful.
It may
I
be
also
helpful
think
for me if we could do it after this session, but I don't want to take up everybody's time, but I actually think it would be really helpful for me.
I also think, to the extent that there was an expectation set forth, that it is certainly not the intent of this list. And if what this document suggests to you is that we're planning to tax our way to prosperity, that is not what this list represents, and we can have a separate debate on whether that would be a good idea. It also does not represent an attempt to tax cut our way to prosperity. It tries to find a middle ground between those two approaches, and in fact include a mix of tax increases and tax reductions that will balance each other out and that will on net produce a more competitive workplace that supports economic participation by a range of players across the city, from small business people to workers just entering the workforce, middle class families, big corporations. I think there are things for all of them to like potentially on this list. The art and the science will be putting it all together into a package that is actually compelling, that contains themes that people, that a wide range of actors in the economy can play to. And it's true. We can only reflect back to you the ideas that we have heard, both from our own review of the literature, of past research pieces. There's been 2 previous tax commissions that commissioned between them dozens and dozens of papers. We've got a whole staff at the Office of Revenue Analysis that does a lot of research. We do have a number of think tanks here in DC from across the spectrum. We've been looking at lots of ideas. But there aren't magic bullets out there. And if we created the expectation that there are magic bullets out there, that by changing something in the tax code, we are going to grow the economy by 25% or something like that, I don't think that magic bullet is out there. That said, it's not too late to hear more ideas from folks, but I don't know what that magic bullet is.
So what I would say is reason why we're calling everyone, the reason why we're having these discussions, get everyone's reaction, including more contribution. So, we're still here. People have additional ideas, bring them to the table. If we need to, if people can make a case, to get to your point, if people can make a case that certain reductions will lead to economic growth, and they can argue that, they've got just as right to argue that as the guy from Cornell who had a right to say taxes don't make any. He didn't really say that, but you know what I mean. They don't have the kind of difference that some people say they do. So let's hear both sides.
And Mayor, just to put this to bed on my end, I appreciate that, and I don't think what Jody is saying is an indictment, or what I'm trying to say is an indictment, it's just where we are. And so, I feel like I've made serial recommendations. One is reflected, and I appreciate it, but I think I've made serial recommendations in these meetings, and they haven't found their way into these proposals. I've talked about, incentives for traditionally marginalized communities, tax incentives for those. We can talk about refundable tax credits for training, for refundable tax.
So get them to, that's what we're paying them to do.
Right.
Get them to
So-
analyze them.
So here we go. So refundable tax credits for hire, refundable tax credits for training, focused incentives on certain financial industries or certain industries that we have a core strength in. And that can be universities or you name it. It can be, some common sense approach to capital gains that can incentivize tech companies to want to be here. I think there are a number of incentives that we can think of. Now, again, we don't want to be in the business of picking winners. That's not what we're trying to do, but I'd like to have the ideas and then dismiss them if we think that they're dumb. But there are ways to look at business growth and job creation that can accomplish a lot of the ideas that we want at this table. Anyway, thank you.
Can we get them to give?
I'd love them to do that.
Yeah,
Put them
if
in
you
the
could,
hopper, okay?
seriously, if you could send me a list of what are your,
Okay.
pick a good number, 5.
All right. I'll be happy to.
5 ideas, we will research the hell out of them, and we will get you.
Thank you, Dan.
And then we will create an opportunity for this commission to meet and talk about it. Maybe we take them up at the beginning of next Friday's meeting.
So this is as good a time as any to bring this up. So I was involved with Congress setting up the control board in Puerto Rico, or whatever they call it. They don't call it, nobody ever calls it a control board, but it basically was a control board. And they have now in Puerto Rico done something called Tax Act 60. So what Tax Act 60 does, they say, is it streamlines and, not homogenizes, but it streamlines and consolidates in one place all the residential and business tax incentives, so they can monitor them better, they can look at them comprehensively, yada, yada, and they're paid for by essentially reducing the state hit on the taxpayers. They've got a lot of room because there's no federal tax in Puerto Rico, right? So they got a lot of room they can work with. So there's interest in, from at least yours truly, in what Tax Act 60 says it does, what it's actually accomplishing, how they pay for it. And here's a question for the commission. Could we say, here's what Tax Act is doing in Puerto Rico, it's leading to more investment. Congress, you have hobbled us with, because we don't have representation, federal government has further hobbled us, and that we don't have the federal presence we did. We essentially have a BRAC. So as a concession, help us pay for these incentives and will help us diversify our economy. That's the question.
You put that on the list.
I mean, it's bold.
Yeah, I'm happy. There has been quite a bit of research done on the impact.
Okay.
They call it Acts 20 and 22 because those are the 2 acts that are folded into Act 60. I think actually GAO is about to start a study, so that'll be interesting. We can put that on the list. But we can talk about timing. We can try to get all that done by next Friday. Okay. This has been a really helpful conversation.
And if people have people feel there really are material, consequential, like David's point or Jody's point, that they want to add into the hopper, do that now. Because we don't want this thing to go on forever, but we do have some license from the council to take the time we need. I think the real governing thing is we don't want this to go on forever, and we want to be influential in the budget. But it's not, we're not going to turn into a pumpkin on December 1st.
Okay. Although I'm doing my best with my recent weekend.
But to turn us into a pumpkin?
No, to turn myself into.
Oh, okay.
All right. Happy to do that. Yeah, and it may cause some adjustments to the schedule just because of bandwidth. We will do our best to do all that and also get a package going forward. And it's, I think the good news is that by getting real about proposals, we are now sparking more intentional responses than we were getting before when things were vague. So that's been a good lesson. Because I do think the model, when I think about, and this goes to the proposals we're going to be talking about today, you know, in the tax policy world, a lot of us, when we think about a model for tax reform, we think about the 1986 Tax Reform Act, federal law that cut rates, broadened the base, closed down a lot of shelters, tax breaks, used that money to address what was then perceived as a huge challenge in terms of directing investment in non-productive ways, which was the combination of high tax rates and then big breaks for unproductive investments. And it also included some the first real earned income tax credit. So it's the kind of, so when we talk about today's proposals, I think it's really important to think about not just the proposal on its own, but how might it fit into a broader package where we're saying, okay, this tax break is nice for the people who are getting it, but is it actually the highest priority for limited dollars? And given our other ideas that are already on the table or that might come forward, is this one the best ones? Because the more we can identify ineffective and outdated tax preferences, the more we can invest in strategies. I would say one other thing about that has come up in my conversations with a couple of people, which is around the racial equity notes that have been included in all of these proposals, and it goes directly to how some of these tax preferences in here are described. We heard early on from experts on racial equity, and it's not really controversial in the economic literature, that uneven treatment of different kinds of investment income has been a contributor to today's deep gulfs income and wealth, because people who had resources were able to invest in things at very low tax rates, and that compounded and just made their wealth get greater. And so we have this deep divide, which is causing us all kinds of problems in all of our society. And so we wanted to make sure that you all have this as a point of information, because it does come up, and there are a lot of policymakers and members of the public who find this to be a really compelling and important perspective on these proposals. There are also policymakers and members of the public who don't find it to be a particularly compelling argument. So it's really just a point of information for you all to know about.
Well, you know, you need to know that when it comes to this is not just there. So there is risk, legal risk, because it's not just because of the late pushback rebuttal to ESG and all that, way back in the late 80s, helping. I'm no longer a practicing lawyer, but I'm opining. So the Supreme Court came up with Croson v. Richmond. You cannot use race in a public contracting situation. Ergo, we pretty much argue you cannot use it to make governmental decisions explicitly. It can inform your decisions, but you cannot be shown to be using race explicitly to make decisions. So we have to really be careful. It's not any commission. This is just where it is, whether we like it or not.
Right. So the proposals we put forward.
Am I right? Don't you know the decision I'm talking about?
Yeah, absolutely. And I also think people expect the tax code to be facially neutral when it comes to race. We don't collect tax data on tax forms, and there's lots of reasons for that. And I think even for people who are concerned about the way that the tax code in fact has worsened racial equity divides, there's a lot of policies you could do to advance racial equity. What we need to be doing is thinking about, as a commission, we need additional reasons for a given change beyond the fact that it will have a particular impact it will have an effect on racial equity. So we have to be able to make a case that's compelling to everyone. And so I hope as we discuss these, racial equity is certainly fair game to discuss. And in addition, let's talk about these provisions, other dimensions of the provisions. Horizontal equity, are we treating all forms of investment income similarly, or are we creating some kinds of investment incomes that's favored? That violates a different kind of equity when economists call horizontal equity, treating similarly situated taxpayers similarly. So my hope is that the racial equity perspective is enriching these conversations and enriching your knowledge and understanding, but it is not limiting our conversations or limiting what's on the table for us.
It cannot be shown to be a critical factor in our decisions. I'm just saying, I would be careful.
Yeah.
In this day and age especially, you know.
Right, that's right. We have to be careful. All right, so with that, let me say a couple words about the proposals that I'm hoping we will not have detailed discussions about, they fall into sort of two categories. So I've got 5 proposals that I'm going to suggest are not hugely controversial, kind of small board proposals that we might agree to consider for possible inclusion in a final package without necessarily talking about it this time. Obviously pending additional input from members of the public or possible additional info from the Office of Revenue Analysis or the Office of Tax and Revenue. And what I have on my list there are B5, providing guidance on PL 86272, which is a corporate tax issue. Fees in FF7, increasing transparency around the data on fees and fines. P13, enhancing property tax deferrals program for seniors, allowing a wider range of seniors to defer their property taxes under certain circumstances. P15, allowing retroactive enrollment of homeowners for the homestead exemption and other property tax expenditures. And P17, allowing homeowners to claim the circuit breaker, in other words, Schedule H, on their property tax instead of just on their income tax. And I take apologies if I've gone too fast for both. If you want me to pull any of those out,
B5.
B5. Others, like, Carolyn, Yeshim, you okay with that? Okay. The other group I had was proposals that I think at this time are ideas that may have merit in theory, and certainly they have strong support from members of the public who've spoken at various sessions, but in some cases, but for various reasons are not practical to implement in this time based on our research. And so we're not making a determination on the theoretical merits of these ideas, but choosing to set them aside so we can spend more time considering ideas that are more immediately realistic. And those ideas are II-15, offering pre-populated tax returns for taxpayers who have simple returns. II-18, taxing a portion of unrealized capital gains. II-19, ending stepped-up basis in income tax. And M7, creating an extreme wealth tax. Anyone want to pull any of those for discussion?
What was the last one?
Stepped up basis.
The stepped-up basis, the unrealized capital gains, I mean, could we maybe just go through them, Nick? Because I think we're going through this consent list pretty quickly. And so that I, for instance, a stepped-up basis, I have discussions I'd like to have on the capital gains section. Certainly on the unrealized capital gains, these are all things I'd like to discuss.
I think what he's saying is, you're saying,
We will discuss them.
we won't discuss them because we're not going to consider them. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, we would set them
They're
aside,
eliminated.
we would not move them forward to final consideration of the package.
Because they're impractical.
I understood
Yeah.
these 4 to be set aside, right? I-15, I-18, and I-19, and M7.
Right, except that Erica is asking for us to have a conversation about ending stepped-up basis in the income
Which
tax.
one was that?
Sorry, 19.
I-
So we'd be setting aside 3, II-15, II-18, and M7.
But to be clear, if we don't discuss them, it means there's no change.
Right, we're taking
Which
them
I-
off the table for considering them
Right.
in a final package.
Thank you.
Nick, would you repeat those again? I'm sorry, Nick, would you repeat those again?
II-15, II-18, and M7.
Okay, thank you.
And Nick, we're taking them off the table. Can you just be very clear with the reason? Is it because administratively they are hard, so it's not practical to discuss them?
Yeah,
Okay, good. Good to know that. I think it's important to put that on the record.
I'm sure some folks would have, there may be other reasons not to be in favor of them, but the reason we're taking them off the table is sort of a threshold reason, like whether you like the idea in theory or you don't like the idea in theory, they're not practical at this time.
Okay, that's great. I just want to make sure we are clear about that.
But that was different from the first bucket, which was.
That was different from the first bucket, which is the other way around. These are sufficiently small bore, not controversial. We want to keep them on the table people can comment on them. We're not necessarily guaranteeing they're gonna be on our final package, but they are kind of seem like common sense-ish ideas.
I understand everything, I don't think I have a problem, but I do want, tonight, I'll read through these. I just don't have everything in front of me. I
Okay,
just wanna make sure I understand what we're saying, but
yeah,
on the surface, I get it.
okay, yeah, yeah, let me know, because we
I
can
will.
bring those back on next
Okay.
Friday.
Thank you, sorry.
Bring them, we can, like, it's this time of year, but the zombie proposals come back from
I get that.
Okay,
So the ones you took off, they're not listed on this chart necessarily?
Chart only refers to
yeah.
the built policy we've discussed in previous meetings. So as we have conversations in this room, they will be added to the table.
Okay. And then is this chart available online?
Yeah,
It's
but-
really helpful.
good, we'll put it
For me.
online. Yeah, it is a selection, it's not every proposal,
I get
there
it.
were some I just didn't put on.
Okay. just
But
fine.
we'll
I
put
get
it online, and we will also be providing you with sort of refined versions. Okay, I am now, at long last, going to turn it over to Richard to talk through the first batch of income tax proposals.
Okay, can I borrow your little helpful table? So, okay. I am gonna rip through, I'll do them one at a time, but I'm gonna move relatively quickly because I'm gonna cover II-16, raise tax rates on high income tax filers, II-20, increase the capital gains tax rate, II-21, limit the social security deduction for high income households, II-22, eliminate the survivor's benefit, in II-25, limit itemized deductions. All of these are tax increases. All of these are tax increases on specifically higher income households. All of these will roughly have the same pros and cons. They were put forward by an organization either to address, in the proponent's eyes, the income and wealth disparity in the District of Columbia, using taxes as a tool to address that, and or to raise revenue, possibly for other tax cuts that we are considering for any of the myriad reasons we are considering tax cuts. They are opposed, broadly speaking, for those same reasons, because they are tax increases on high-income households who already pay a relatively large share of the tax burden in the district.
Remind us again what percentage of that is that?
That would depend specifically on how we cut it, and I can only tell you for the income tax.
Okay.
But broadly speaking, if we look at 27, 47, I have this here. Very broadly speaking, if we look at households who are earning above 100,000, we're talking like 80 to 85% of the income tax payments from households who earn above 100,000. If we looked above 500,000, that would be roughly 45% of all the income tax payments. If we looked at $1 million, that would be 34%.
And what was the 80%? That was above what?
For 100,000 and above.
And that's not, that's dollars, that's the 34% of the dollars.
They are paying 34% of the income taxes the District of Columbia collects.
Right, got it, thank you.
Caveats being, one, they also have a disproportionate share of the income in the District of Columbia. So if I do the same cutoffs, it'd be 10, 15. So basically households earning above 100,000, I might be doing this quick math a little wrong, they earn roughly 80% of the income in the District of Columbia. The top households earning above 500,000 earn roughly 30% of the income in the District of
But
Columbia.
they pay 45%.
Exactly, because of the marginal income tax, the way the income tax works is the more you earn, the more your share goes up.
I get that, and so the 1 million earns about what percent?
Households earning above $1 million earn roughly 22% of income in the District of Columbia.
Got it,
They pay roughly 34% of income taxes to the
Got it.
District of Columbia.
thank you.
Other caveat being, there are numerous other taxes paid by households up and down the income spectrum, and broadly speaking, all of those other taxes take a larger share of income, not total, larger share of income from lower income households, and that is just simply because if you earn $20,000, you spend every cent you earn. So when you go out and buy stuff and you do stuff, you're spending. If you earn 200 or 2 million, you're saving a large chunk. So one, that's not going out the door, but two, there are benefits, including in the tax code, to saving those dollars. Table, yes?
In the reverse, I'm just curious, families at different levels, the amount that is paid versus the amount that is received.
Are we talking benefits again?
Sorry?
Are we talking government benefits?
Yes.
No idea.
So it is conceivable that we have families who have incomes of maybe less than $30,000, whose total government benefits, though, would put them in $100,000 line. When you consider the amount that is received for rental assistance, the amount that is received for medical services.
I mean, David, it's plausible, but it's also incredibly complicated because you have marginal tax rates going up and down.
Look, I'm just asking.
And I'm answering that it would be a really specific answer that I'm in no way prepared to respond to. And I apologize for not having that information to inform this conversation, but the amount of work it would require to do would not be possible.
Not, of course, not now at this table.
Not within the year-ish we'd like to wrap this up. But you are correct that, broadly speaking, higher income households pay a larger share in taxes. Lower income households pay a disproportionate share, but also get a disproportionate share of benefits from benefits that are targeted at low and middle income households.
So folks who are the high income earners, just to finish the point, who are 500,000, million, or whatever, the folks that we consider to be wealthy, that might pay the 50% or 34% of the total amount of freight, we don't know how much they actually get in exchange for those percentages, do we?
No, because you'd also have to calculate how much their home is worth, and how much their education is worth, and how much it is to them for their children to live there. So, like, the answer is no.
I don't think that's an unfair question. I mean, because I think
You're right. It's not an unfair question, but it's a complicated one.
Yeah, all right.
I'm not convinced about, the cause and effect of higher tax rates and family mobility. Nevertheless, I think given where we are with a fragile economy and an uncertain future, now is not the time to raise personal income taxes. I think it sends the wrong message when at a time when, crime is bad. There are other things in the city that are also encouraging people perhaps to consider other places. So I just don't think this is the time to be raising personal income taxes. And we might have to revisit that later on if we find out that we're broke for a lot of reasons. But that's the worst reason to raise income taxes is because you're broke. And so I don't think we're there yet. So at this point, I wouldn't look at these.
Are you going to go through the proposals, or?
I don't know. Seriously, is this helpful? Because Gregory, I think you put it well. And if you want to, we could just shove them right off the table, but I would need the entire commission to articulate that.
No, I think
We don't all agree.
I think,
so.
Right.
well, one, we don't all agree, but I'm looking at it as a chair. I have my own personal views, but as a chair, something like this should be open to public comment. How can you take this as a summary consent? I mean, it's got to be open for the public to look at. We can't say, oh yeah, we just took this off the table without any input. I think it should be taken off the table. We should hear, that's my own view. We should hear from the public. Did I make one other point?
Of course.
Did I? Yeah. So the thing on the Social Security deduction, I think on two levels. One, again, personally, I don't think we should in this economy, aside from the dismal science not providing us any real concrete guidance one way or the other, because everybody's got an argument in economics. But the signals we send are important, and the signals we send with Social Security deduction is important. I'm a big believer when they had all the arguments about benefits a while back. You don't want to take away benefits, some benefits from wealthier people, because then they lose any sort of engagement and followership in this program. So, right, like saying we ought to tax rich people more for Medicare, that's the best way to start cutting Medicare. Or take out their deduction for Social Security. is the best way for them to lose interest in it and over time erode the value of that benefit. So I would be against that, if I'm making any sense.
Well, Mayor Williams, to your point, what if I briefly summarize these 4 options and then allow commissioners to comment on any of them
Yeah.
or as a package?
Yeah.
Is that okay, broadly speaking, with everyone?
Or we're interfering with your show?
Nope, this is your show.
Okay.
Agree.
Will you give me the?
Oh, you agree I'm interfering
It's
with it? Okay, yeah, go
It's
ahead.
1 on 16, give me the 4, just so.
16, 20, 21,
Yeah.
22, 25.
So there's-
16, 20, 22, and 25?
Apologies, 16,
20, 21, 22, and 25. Yeah.
so there are 5 policies, got it,
Okay.
yes.
got it. Okay.
First one,
Thank you, sorry.
no need to apologize. There's a lot. First one, very simple. Raise tax rates on high income filers, just income tax. Raise them. You're and above, you pay more. That's 16. 20 is increase the capital gains tax rates. Broadly speaking, at the federal level, there are 2 different sets of taxes, in the sense that if you earn income, you pay all the tax rates. If you earn capital income, and you hold it for longer than a year, you pay a lower one, 20%. In the district, we use
The speaker's frozen.
gain income among higher income people, and so therefore the tax increase would even further disproportionately fall on the highest income earners. 21, limit the Social Security deduction, as Mayor Williams was discussing. Currently, if you earn Social Security income, on your federal tax return, if you earn above a certain amount total, not on Social Security total, you pay a tax on it. The district says you earn 1 penny Social Security income, you don't owe any tax on all of it. Doesn't matter, there's no tax on Social Security income. This would make a share of that Social Security income possibly taxable on the DC return. Again, among only that subset of higher income households. 2022 is something called a survivor benefit exclusion. I don't want to get bogged down in this. It's a tax expenditure. We talked about it. It wasn't popular to get rid of in 2013. I doubt it's popular enough to get rid of in 2023. Proposal 23, deduction for state and local municipal bonds. In other states, you can get, you are allowed, your earnings from a bond in your state. So if you live in Maryland, you buy a Maryland bond, you don't pay tax on the income. But if you buy a Pennsylvania bond, a Virginia bond, et cetera, you pay tax. The argument being we want to incentivize you to get Maryland bonds. In DC, you get it on everything.
You pay.
You get the exemption. No
You get
matter
the
no matter
exemption
what
on
state
all
you
of
invest in,
Yeah.
yes, the exemption holds for everyone.
The notion being that there aren't enough district bonds to
Right.
go around. You
Yes.
have to go outside of the city if you want to tax homogenic.
Yes.
Well, I'll make a point later, you know what I'm.
I mean, like, there are lots of really good tax arguments, but man, the people who love this love it.
Yeah,
And so,
we're trying to get rid of
watch
that.
out. And then 25 is limit itemized deductions. Again, when you file tax, you can take the standard deduction, or you can itemize your mortgage, your property tax, etc.
Charitable? Or charitable?
Charity, yes, 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 yes.
I-
In the district, there is already a limitation on how much you can take. This would basically turn those screws tighter, either by ramping up the rate a little bit or by capping it for either the mortgage interest and or the property tax. With that, I'm out. I'm happy to answer specific questions on all this or allow comments.
Let me just clarify one point. On the itemized deductions, it's not actually a limit on how much you can deduct, it's more the floor. So you have to have above a certain amount of itemized deductions
In order
to be able to get the deduction. Right now, that's 5%. The proposal on the table is to increase it to 7.5%. The other ideas here, I just want to flag the property tax deduction, capping that at $10,000 would follow the federal provision. And right now, sort of similar to the muni bond thing, right now you can deduct your property taxes that you pay to any jurisdiction of the country. So if you own property elsewhere, you can deduct the taxes that you pay to that other jurisdiction from your DC taxes, and this would count that.
So we'd be coupling back to the federal standards. Will we be willing to also couple back to federal standards the death tax or the exemption?
So that goes to the point about a package, is we, you know, when we raise revenue, if you have something that's sort of, I don't think this is that great of a tax break, can we put it on the table and then think about using that revenue to pay for, well, a tax break that we might think is more worth. So yeah.
So to Jim's, I'm sorry. So here's a cautionary tale on Jim's point about wealth creation in African American families. Onward to be called families with lower incomes, because we can't say race or anything. So when we did the estate tax in the last iteration, we coupled the state tax to the federal. And the big argument before the council, I don't know if you were on the council at that point, David, was all the opponents of it were saying, oh, you know, they were using values that they thought were only about the elite rich in the district, when in fact, your average family in the district would have been hit by this because of their home price. That's their biggest asset in their family, right? Which could easily be for a relatively just, you know, middle-class family, $800,000, let's say, $900,000. You're taking a whack out of that. That is going directly against what Jim is saying is wealth creation for, you know, I mean, so I would argue we should put that back on the table.
We'll get to the, I think we're talking about the state tax exemption.
I just wanted to say, I think, because I was thinking of things that haven't been, like David was saying, things that haven't been.
We should increase the,
right.
The executive.
It just occurred to me that Jim's point about wealth creation needs to be recognized somewhere.
Income grow in the district, and we've seen pretty consistent underestimations of what we're going to get in income tax collections, particularly for withholding income, so not the investment income. So, I mean, one way to think about where you want to raise taxes when you decide you need to or want to raise taxes is by looking at where you have certain growth and where you can tax without causing harm. So I just think that we have pretty consistent income growth here in DC, and so that is a good source, plus it's progressive and based on ability to pay for us to raise revenue for the kinds of investments we want to make in communities. I'd also just say, you know, we talked a little bit in this space about folks wanting to do a middle income rate cut. And one way you could think about paying for that is through one of these high rate, 16, with the higher rates on higher, like on $1 million plus. I think it was $1 million, it was 5 million, and maybe there was a rate
Or
above
choose
that.
your own adventure.
You know, some version of that could be used to buy down the middle income rates, if that's a priority for lots of folks in this group. I would say on capital gains, and one of the reasons I'm really interested in seeing us continue to look at proposals for strengthening the capital gains tax, is that it's one of the only tools we have for taxing wealth, which we tax very little of in this country. Very little wealth gets taxed. And yet and that is part of why we have such an extreme concentration of it among a very small few. And being able to sort of strengthen our capital gains tax in order to like deconcentrate some of that wealth and use that to invest in the district in ways that are going to benefit the economy more broadly, seems like a very smart thing to do, as well as being progressive and racially equitable. But it is like one of the only tools we have for addressing wealth concentration. So that is something I would like to see us do. I think strengthening the capital gains tax rate makes a lot of sense. And what I'll say about the stepped-up basis and why I didn't want to just sort of sweep it off the table is that is kind of like a loophole that allows people to pass on assets, investments, unrealized gains, and not have any, and pass those on, and then the baseline for what gets taxed gets bumped up for the next person, for the heir that gets those assets, and we don't end up taxing any of the gains that came before it. So you just get all this money that gets passed on tax-free, and that is also how we end up with intergenerational transfer of wealth that gets further and further concentrated. And that's a tax policy proposal that's likely to, most of the impacts going to fall on like the very top, like the top 1% of households. And so, there are different ways to do it. One way, and I would wish we had the CFO here, because I would be interested in knowing if switching from a stepped-up basis to like a carryover basis would be as administratively difficult as taxing at the time of transfer. So, that's something I would love for us to get more information on before we knock that one off the list.
In the absence, I'll say, appreciate your point of view, Eric. I just disagree. There are lots of property owners and business owners in the city that would be clobbered by the inability to have stepped-up basis. Properties or businesses are owned by the husband and wife, and then tax burdens can be imposed, and the spouse, the surviving spouse or surviving business is left with it. So it's just not compelling enough that
But there's
city,
no reason not to tax those gains.
But if I might, but there's no reason to if we don't need the money. This city has a balanced budget and a 5-year financial plan that has a balanced budget. This city's state and local expenditures are twice that of the nearest state in this country, which is Connecticut. We spend twice as much. As I mentioned at an earlier point, we've grown this government by our employees by 20% in the last decade, while our population has grown by 5%. So we've hardly tightened our belts here. And to simply say we can tax you because we can and we should because it allows us to have a particular point of view, it can't be made. Look, if we would have, and if you'll bear with me, we're going to start looking at how intergenerational failure to tax actually impacts the cities. I want to call your attention to, just bear with me, Mr. Mayor, how this works in the world of nonprofits, where we don't tax nonprofits, right? I've spoken repeatedly about this. We had one on the table for universities, but nothing else. So I want to point out the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities. In the year before COVID, had $51 million in revenue and had $41 million in expenses. They had a profit of $11.9 million on which they paid nothing. I'm thinking of small businesses in the district, so we're talking about the Virginia Ali's, the Ben's Chili Bowl. They're paying 9% on this. The Center on Budget and Policy pays nothing. They simply roll it over and roll it over and roll it over. And in that year, pre-COVID, had $112 million in assets, having never paid a nickel, not a cent. So to say, well, gosh, we should just start, it's easy to take on large, very rich people. They are not exactly sympathetic. I'm mindful of our middle class who are saving, who have capital gains, who are depending on Social Security to pay their means and whatever else they can save. They get clobbered under the notion of, well, we're just going to soak the rich. No. The rich should find a way to get away from taxes, really. It's called Florida or someplace else.
Okay, bringing up Nick and Erica's former employer is one thing. I wanted to let Yesem talk about the income tax proposals if she has a comment.
And then we will break.
Thank you. I'm just in a really bad environment here. You can hear the background sounds. I'm just going to hold off and ask my questions either through our one-on-one or next week. Sorry about that.
You're fine.
We haven't heard anything. It's fine.
Did you have a comment? Oh, just.
Actually, I have a question. When are we going to get some results on the most recent tax returns for DC? I thought that we were getting something mid-October. I think that information would be helpful as I think through these proposals.
So the mobility?
So the filing deadline was October 15th. So the team at ORA is working diligently to get the data, turn it around, put it in the format we need it, and get it to us. So I don't have a specific date, but it's very top of mind for us. Okay, should we take?
I would just add to David's point, as someone who believes deeply and dedicated my whole life to public service, school, government, and I believe in, as Chet Kennedy says, the dream will never die and all that. I'm totally into that, totally into working to solve these problems. That said, just since I got on the scene, we've spent billions of dollars to address these issues, and we're not making, the needle's not moving. So I'm just a little skeptical that just more money, as opposed to the right money and well-deployed money, is going to make a difference.
Does the mayor has an anti-poverty commission or something? Isn't there a poverty commission? Isn't there an anti-poverty commission that's supposed to be looking at?
I don't think
But if you look
identified
at
the commission.
Right.
concentration of poverty, employment levels, all the metrics, just tons and tons of dollars deployed, and we're not seeing a change.
I think I agree. It would be great analysis to see what the impact is of all the efforts that have been underway, and I'd be happy to. I think I got a call from a guy who was staffing a poverty commission a few months ago, so we can put this on there. Maybe we could suggest that they take a look at that. Should we reconvene at 20 past?
So we're an hour and 10 minutes in. How many have we covered?
3. I don't know. I got no. All right, we are starting again. Welcome back. Yeshua, I know you have to cut out in 20 minutes or so. So make sure to give you a chance to weigh in. So we took a look at the list of what we have left to talk about. I want to say a couple more words about the income tax proposals, both those we've discussed and some we haven't discussed. And we're going to spend the bulk of our time talking about some property, a couple of property tax ideas, and then we will figure out how to regroup to cover the rest of what we need to cover. So what I heard from the last conversation was some strong resistance from some members of the commission to raising any taxes on any high-income people. That's what I heard. If that's not correct, we do have options that would eliminate.
That is distinct from broadening the tax base to include people who don't pay their fair share.
No, including that.
No,
I'm saying
then-
what I heard was do not adopt any of these measures because something here will raise, and I'm not necessarily associated with this perspective, but if there is a policy perspective that says we have a lot of high-income people in the district, they pay a fair amount of taxes already, we should do nothing that would
On these
require
ones only,
any
right.
of them to be raising any taxes.
Could I just make a point of clarification? There are two different things. There's broadening the base and expanding the base. To me, broadening the base would be like Tax Act of 1986, where you eliminated all kinds of loopholes and, do-arounds and all that. To me, that's broadening the base. Then you get into the argument, does your tax regime expand the economy and expand the base? They're related, but they're different. So, for example, you could say that reducing income taxes could expand the base, but it's not going to broaden the base because the people who aren't paying still won't be paying. Now, and that's different from the whole question of signals you're sending. I just wanted to clarify the difference.
Thank you, that's helpful, thank you. I'm probably using wrong words.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to distinguish the two.
Right.
The
Do
two
you see what I'm saying?
There are two different
Because
concepts.
you're-
I appreciate it.
Yeah.
So you could say we're going to broaden the base and get people who don't pay right now in order to do X, Y, Z. It could be expenditure program, it could be a tax reduction overall.
I want to say.
Yeah, okay, for that.
So, right, I would associate Jody primarily with the perspective of expanding the base. I would associate Gregory with the perspective of broadening the base.
I think one way to go after the people who should pay, who aren't paying, as opposed to people who should pay more. New York, I understand, is a very effective way of tracking people who live in the city who don't pay taxes here. So finding administratively the way to capture the people who should be paying but aren't is something that's valuable. And New York is very adroit at credit card usage, phone usage, and so on. I mean, adopting something like that, I think, would be a no-brainer. It would certainly be, I'd certainly support it. And you only have to go through certain high-end neighborhoods to see Florida Plate, Florida Plate, Florida Plate. All right? And so why not try to get those who should pay under the existing regime to pay, as opposed to those who are already bearing a heavy burden to pay more?
I would agree with that. I would agree with that also, because I think broadening the base is one of the things that I thought we were looking at. I have some comments, but I'm going to save them at the end when it comes to racial justice and also the wealth creation, but I'll save them until the end.
Okay. So one thing I think that has gotten us, I want to suggest a slightly different way of thinking about some of these income tax proposals. And we've probably been guilty in putting forward some of these distributional tables and putting a lot of focus on the individuals and the people who are paying these different taxes. I want to focus instead on types of income. One of the principles of income taxation is that unless there's a very good reason not to do it, we may want to tax similar types of income similarly. So you've probably heard Warren Buffett make the joke, not joke, about the crack about his secretary pays taxes at a higher rate than he does. But it's really not about him and his secretary. It's because his income takes a different form than his secretary's. So I would say, other than the raising tax rates on high income filers and increasing the capital gains tax rate, most of these proposals are aimed at in Tony's formulation, which I agree with, would be tax base broadening in the sense that they call for taxing types of income that are not currently subject to tax. And hence, to some extent, I mean, obviously that flows through to the individual. We have 4 proposals here that eliminate tax breaks for investors. They're all rooted in our conformity to the federal tax code. Muni bonds, we discussed a minute ago. It makes a lot of sense for the federal government to exempt muni bonds from taxation. Every other state has recognized it doesn't necessarily make sense for them to similarly exempt muni bonds from taxation. So that's a particular type of income that anybody can have, but it is exempt under the DC code. We've got a couple of other more smaller tax breaks that are discussed in the write-ups for qualified small business gains and for ING trusts that at least some other states have said, yeah, that maybe that made sense at the federal level, but for us as a state, this is benefiting investors, including a lot of investors on their investments that are out of state. So they're not really tied to investments, say in DC. The investments are getting great, and the stepped-up basis is similar to a lot of the breaks for that code. So I don't think we should have a discussion about that because I think we're getting sidetracked into discussions about taxing the rich or not taxing the rich. If folks have perspectives on
just a generic perspective, and the one thing that appeals to me as well is the concept of modernizing our tax policy. So if any of these clearly fall into a situation whereby compared to 10 or 20 years ago, things have changed and the council never got around to addressing it or didn't want it, like, so I don't know whether these are policy changes or whether these are cleanup changes, but for me, the cleanup changes are, no matter who is the plus or minus, I think are compelling to do. So it'd be great to have like an asterisk next to a couple that are just what I call cleanups or modernizing the tax base. We talked about that the internet, I'm going to call the internet data tax. Well, it's not a tax increase. It's just modernizing, taxing something that didn't exist 10 or 20 years ago. So are these other things fall into those categories or not?
I would say some clearly do. I mean, muni bonds have been around since the 30s. I think it's hard to describe that as modernizing. I would say it's moving towards a more appropriate tax base. I don't know if there's anything. The other thing that's changed is that the council, when the 2013 commission considered this, the council had just reinstated that exemption. The 2013 council's not around it anymore.
You say legacy media is taxed.
I would
Modern
say
media, social media destroyed local legacy media, and it's not taxed.
I hear you.
And David raised this point before about pensions, I think, or something, but like the fairness argument of people having made lifetime investment decisions, perhaps retired early or late based on that, they come here, and then all of a sudden we're changing the calculus from underneath them. Now maybe you could phase it in over 10 years, so by the time they were affected, they'd be older, but that's also a factor I think we have to look at.
Yeah.
I think it's fair if you give people the runway to say this is from this point forward. But again, I go back to my earlier point, Mayor. I'd like to see, once we put these out to comments on the issue of this internet tax, if what we think we're doing is we're going to get Google, that's one thing. If some of our remaining legacy providers, like, I'm saying Denise Robart Barnes is very much against this tax on the internet. I don't want to cut our nose off to spite our face and cripple the remaining local providers of content. And if we think we're going after Google, does that make sense? Because her ad revenue is tied to Google's ad revenue. I just need to know more about that before I would say this makes sense or not. So, I'm willing to give these things a good review. I just am waiting to hear other people weigh in.
So we're going to change gears now and talk about property taxes. And Richard's going to kick us off with a discussion of P18, property tax rate for first-time homeowners.
Yes. So this is discussing deed and recordation tax.
Which one is this, I'm sorry?
P18. Expand the special deed the recordation tax rate for first-time buyers. So anytime a property is sold or transferred, personal and residential and commercial, there's a tax on the transaction. In the district, there is a relatively lower tax if the value of the property is below $400,000 than if it's above $400,000. There's one special tax rate that comes into play if the person purchasing the home in the district is a first-time homeowner. It's a first-time homeowner, that rate, which could be 1.45 or 2.9, again, depending on the value of the home, is reduced to 0.725%. And broadly speaking, we want to incentivize or assist those who want to buy their first home in the district, and so therefore the tax is reduced for them.
Regardless of the value of the home.
No, good question. The person applying for this must earn below a certain threshold. It varies depending on how many people are in the home. Like literally, like if you're a family of 5 as opposed to a person of 1, there are different thresholds ranging from roughly 180,000 to 340,000. And it can only be for homes valued at less than currently $684,500. Thus, the proposal would be to A, lower that rate further, so you're giving them an even bigger tax cut to first-time home buyers by reducing the rate to say 0.25 or even 0%, or anywhere in between. But then also expanding eligibility and making that simpler. So, for example, making an eligible income just simply being $360,000 for single adults, $680,000 for married adults, or whatever thresholds you would like to encourage, and or possibly changing the restrictions on the value of the homes that would be eligible for this. The reasons you would do this is because you would hopefully be encouraging home ownership, both for people who live outside the district to move into the district because they can take advantage of this, or for those who live in the district but are considering buying their first home to encourage them to buy a home and be there. And that is not only just attracting people, it's also attracting people who live here and thus will pay income and sales and all the rest of the tax. The arguments against it is that even though there are limitations, this inevitably will be a benefit that would go to not necessarily the wealthiest, but wealthy homeowners or higher income people would get more benefit from it than lower income people. ORA, estimated a couple of versions of this. Again, it all depends on where you set the knobs. But for the stuff that we're kind of discussing, you're looking at anywhere between $3 and $10 million, depending on how far you push this, or if you wanted to push it further, you could possibly get that amount. Does that answer any questions or listen to comments?
So the home value says less than $400,000?
No, Carolyn, the 400,000 is currently, there's 2 rates. So that's where the split. To be eligible for this, currently the home must be less than $684,500.
What is the average cost of a 3-bedroom house in Washington, D.C.?
That's a damn good question.
I think that's low.
Inflation.
Absolutely.
In other words, the 680, is this is something with the dynamic housing market. We want to pick the right point, to Carolyn's point, pick the right level, and then adjust it for inflation. Personally, I'd be in favor, for first-time home buyers, I'd be in favor of 0 transfer deed recordation, period. And I'd be very open at a certain income threshold for a refundable tax credit for a portion of the down payment. And in my view, if we're trying to improve wealth and help people's families create generational wealth, it may be the most efficient use of our dollars to focus them on middle-income families, more so than families that are very low income. So if you've got a bunch of folks in the middle, the teachers and the firefighters who are looking to buy their first home in the district, it makes sense to me to give them the relief on the deed recordation. Again, I just think why we wouldn't give a refundable tax credit of a certain amount to all of a sudden open people's minds that this is a good place to invest for yourself and your families, create the wealth that we're trying to talk about, the intergenerational commitment, and the tying them to the city. Could we get any information on what that might look like? Is that too, are we too late in the process?
Sorry, what specifically?
On a district refundable tax credit, like I would look, let's just say we did for first-time home buyers, if it's a $600,000 house, you're looking at 10%, which is low, it's $60,000 if we're gonna get a mortgage for that. If the district were to offer $10,000, $20,000 refundable tax credit that has multiple years of recovery, a lower income family or a middle income family might not have that big of a district tax burden on an annual basis, but that could be carried forward until completed. There's some value to at least considering that. This would be something we used to do, and Mayor Williams knows about this. We used to have a project that Eleanor Norton championed, that first-time home buyers. It was very successful. It got people focused. Well, the values have changed. And what I like is the notion of we're going to help you invest in yourself in the city. Why would you consider that?
Yes, and yes.
And the federal provision is still in place.
I don't know, Mayor. A lot
I think it
changed.
still is. Is it that Eleanor put in way back in the day?
It was like $2,000.
Yoshin's trying to get in. She's
Great, yes.
an answer to your
Oh,
question.
yes, I'm sorry.
I believe so. So here are my two questions. First, at about $690,000 a pop, this is like $20,000 of, tax write-offs. I'll be interested in finding out, I couldn't see it in the write-up, what the ORI estimate is for the estimated tax loss. I would also love to compare it to the other proposal. I know you haven't covered it yet, but eliminating the 2% cap on the taxable assessments on seniors. In my world, if one of them pays for the other, let's go do it. But I wouldn't put my arms around the fiscal impacts, because if it's like $40 million, let's discuss it. If it's $5 million, let's do it.
I mean,
Also, this is Carolyn. Also, did we have a proposal that addressed recordation tax for transfer of property as we talk about wealth accumulation? Did we have a proposal on that? I thought we did. If we did, can we look at that also?
yes.
Because that's a big one, particularly for people of color. Transferring property to heirs, the recordation tax. Sometimes it's almost impossible for them to come up with the money to do that.
The CFO scoring of this, I assume, does not take into account a family's decision to remain in the district to buy their first home, as opposed to going to Chantilly or Gaithersburg where they thought they could afford it before. So it doesn't take into account the desired impact of people's remaining. And haven't we identified many strings here where, since we don't have a commuter tax, that getting people to remain in the district rather than move out, be it for affordable housing or for better schools, getting some skin in the game, staying in the city, paying dual income taxes, that should be a priority for us.
Yeah. Hypothetically, if this worked and 100 families decided to stay here instead of going somewhere else, that is times X whatever they're paying in income, and then property and pay on into the future, as opposed to losing it if they were to move out.
But it doesn't assure people stay here for the long haul. This is a one-time
Sure.
thing. You're the first time, right? So.
True. I just, to David's point, I just think whatever we can do to support, I'm going to say young, because I'm assuming they're mostly young, but a first-time home buyer, to give it a whirl, give the district a try, and maybe most of them will leave when they get more money or have more children or want more space or a yard or whatever. But for those who want to stay, then that's a big success.
That's another question.
Bye, everyone. I gotta catch my plane. Bye.
All right, bye.
Do you have anything?
For federal, we just have to design it.
Well, if you could find out about that federal for me, that would be good. Someone's gonna answer that. They
Which is
just,
$20,000 times.
We'll look into it.
Okay.
Research associated with
So research associated with, like, is it
I mean, we did say looking for things in data and evidence and sources. Just throwing
to me,
out
the
ideas without having.
dynamic scoring of it to me is helpful. You can show that someone's gonna be in their home for 10 years versus somewhere else. That's, 8, 9% off the top.
right, except somebody else will come in and buy that house. I mean, you're preferencing one group of home buyers over another group of home buyers. So I don't know how the CFO would score. I don't know if they would say
That's
there's
true.
some
'Cause
ancillary.
Yeah, where you have a lot of demand and pent-up demand, that's different from back, and I'm still thinking back in the day when
Yeah,
nobody
right.
wanted the house, you're right.
yeah. I mean, I think in the long run, there's clearly an economic, we've heard a lot of benefit to having families go roots down here, or whether that'll show up in scoring.
I'm sorry, Nick, I just wanted to say, you think that
Sure.
a refundable tax credit, you think, would that privilege one family over a family who'd already purchased in the district? I mean, other than the actual financial benefit, are you thinking it will have an impact on pricing, or what's the downside?
Oh, I would say there was a downside. The question is there such a clear, immediate sort of macroeconomic benefit that it would be reflected in the scoring? And I think, like, we're still gonna have the same number of houses occupied by the same number of families. We're just trying to get first-time home buyers to make that.
But we're not, we're having cranes going up, creating new units for greater demand.
That would be the idea.
Yeah.
The other one's 15,000 new households downtown. My thought is just, let's think about it. I just told Gregory, we pour $500 million into the Housing Production Trust Fund. These 10,000 or whatever per person would have an incredible immediate impact on wealth creation for those families. In other words, we're not doing $500 million in Housing Production Trust Funds for renters to have the worst form of kind of housing stability imaginable. It's about leveraging that money for home ownership to lock people in. I don't think there's more money we need, it's just about how we might recommend it be distributed.
Mayor Williams, this is TurboTax, so please take it with a grain of salt. But it says that the credit still exists, but you must have purchased your home before December 31, 2000. Oh no, this is old. So, but it's for older. You must have done it like before 2011. And that thing phased out for roughly $90,000.
Okay.
So it might still be kicking around.
Okay. All right, the last one we will talk about today, unless there's anything else on that. The last one we'll talk about today is the P14 and P16. We'll start with P16, which is around means accessible property tax relief programs, most prominently the Schedule H circuit breaker. So you might remember that way back when in February, Adam Langley from the Lincoln Institute of Tax Policy did a presentation on the structure of our Schedule H circuit breaker, which targets assistance to homeowners and renters who have who relative to their incomes, have high property tax burdens. So the concept of a circuit breaker is that if your property tax is above a certain percentage of your income, say 3%, then the circuit breaker will help defray the amount of taxes you're paying above that level. When he said the circuit breaker that we have in the district is not doing nearly as good a job as it could, given the resources we're spending. And thinking more broadly, and looking at all of the property tax revisions we have, we're not doing nearly as good a job of making sure that assistance is going to those individual homeowners and renters whose property taxes are most burdensome. And broadly speaking, he suggested 4 areas of improvement. One is to expand the circuit breaker for homeowners. And in this proposal, it would do that by raising the credit, by increasing income limits, by simplifying the threshold. Right now, some are at 3%, some are at 5%, this would just say 3% for everybody. His second area of improvement was to focus on need rather than age. Right now, we have a very different set of rules for seniors than for non-seniors.
So
His
focus on
recommendation,
means?
say again?
On means?
Need,
Okay.
not age, was his phrase. And so what he's suggesting is we have the same rules for seniors as for non-seniors, but we consider different rules for homeowners than for renters, because in fact these programs work really differently for homeowners than renters. His third recommendation was to strengthen the program we have for allowing people, if they have very high property taxes, to defer those taxes, and that's discussed in P13, which we discussed earlier, the possibility of not discussing that here, but that is on the table to make it much easier for seniors if they have property tax bills and aren't offset by these various programs we have for them, to defer them, and then to make some improvements in the credit for renters as well. So that is essentially what we are doing here in this fairly detailed proposal.
But it's basically targeted to lower income. It's not for Lord Hawthorne can't take care of his estate.
That's the intent. There is some evidence. ORA did a big, huge study on the circuit breaker recently. They found some evidence that we do have, that the circuit breaker and even more some of the other programs that are intended to be targeted towards sort of statute, you would say low income, but in fact that people with pretty high value homes are taking advantage of these programs. And so one of the things we're talking about doing here is as a way to make these more effective for the most highly property tax burdened households, to cap or curtail the ability of people with relatively higher value homes or higher incomes to take advantage of them. Not to say they wouldn't benefit. For instance, one of the proposals would, there's right now we offer in the district, if your household income for tax purposes is up to $150,000 as a senior, you can get a 50% break on your property taxes, no matter how high that property tax bill is. And that obviously means that for a given homeowner, the more expensive their house, the higher the value of the credit. The proposal here is to limit that at a $2,500 benefit. Everybody gets $2,500 benefit if they meet this income threshold, all seniors, but it would limit it, and you could then plow that savings into making the property tax circuit breaker more effective for those who are highly burdened. Similarly, proposal P14, we have in place and have had for a couple of years an assessment cap for seniors. So everybody in the district gets a property tax credit if their assessment rises by more than 10% year over year. In periods when assessments are going way high, that's a very valuable credit. Assessment in periods where assessments are rising at lower rates, it kind of goes away. It doesn't affect very many people, have as big a fiscal impact. The 2% property tax assessment, most years assessments are going to go up by at least 2%, if not more. That's going to do like what Proposition 13 in California does, accelerate over time, kind of get more and more costly over time. ORA is estimating that repealing that would only save us about $5 million in the first year. In just 5 years, it would be saving us $15 million and property taxes. And again, I think real question about whether it's very well targeted. It's intended, of course, to help seniors who are stuck in, they're in a home, you want to keep them in the home, their assessments are going out of control. I think Adam's argument when he presented to us was a much better way to help those folks is through an expanded circuit breaker program that would say, hey, we're going to try to really target this assistance to the households who are getting slammed, to those homeowners who are getting slammed by rising assessments. But we're going to curtail it to those who could probably afford it. And those who are sort of in between, who are struggling with it, but don't meet the guidelines, can defer their property taxes under our expanded property tax deferral program, which offers a fairly low interest rate and a very high cap on the amount of property taxes you can defer until the home is sold or passed on. So I will stop talking. Very curious about your reactions to all of this.
Is the circuit breaker fix in this, or is that separate?
That is part of, the circuit breaker fix is part of proposal P16. So we are increasing the credit, we're increasing the income ceiling, particularly for homeowners, and making some other changes and there is a cost to this. It'll be more expensive, but some of that cost is offset by limiting the other credit that we have, the senior property tax credit. And I have David, last week you talked about the utility of sort of summaries of all these different programs we have. I did add something that I initially created for myself just to keep it all straight, an overview of DC's property tax relief program. So this is only tax-based programs, only property tax-based relief. It's not just those targeted at seniors, but hopefully it will help you a little bit keep these all straight.
That's P16, right?
P16, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think the expansion of Schedule H is a really good idea. And I would encourage folks to go back and look at the presentation Adam Langley made, because he had a sort of table or a chart that showed, what share of income people were spending on property taxes based on their income and their property value. And one example is like if your income is at like $40,000 a year and your house is appreciated to maybe $700,000 because you're in a neighborhood that's coming up, you're paying 10, 11% of your income in property taxes, even after the homestead deduction and the circuit breaker, because the circuit breaker is capped at a certain amount, so it's not getting, you're not getting the reduction that you want to get for that household. And so like what we're talking about, I think particularly older homeowners in the district who like to hold on to their homes, who like to be able to pass those properties on to their family members, not having adequate sort of relief through Schedule H, it's going to hamper their ability to do that. So I feel like this would be a really good investment, and I do think that there's some of these other breaks that could be kind of dialed back to free up some cash for it. So we're digging into this, and that 50% credit against property taxes, for example, there's like almost 300 properties valued over like $1.5 million that get that deduction. And there's 16 homeowners getting that deduction with properties valued over $3 million. So maybe they have ways to kind of minimize their income to the 150,000 AGI. But if they've got a $3 million home, is that where we want to prioritize those dollars, or would we rather plug those dollars into the circuit breaker that go to homeowners that are struggling to pay property taxes?
I'd love to see your research out. I want to learn more about this. I'm not ready to take a stance on this, but I'll say in the Union Market neighborhood, we have seen a huge appreciation in home value And the last thing we want to have happen is that our residents, who are generational residents, be taxed out of living there. It is a big concern of ours, is how do we continue to be a tide that lifts all the boats? And so, I don't think this should go to people who can, I don't know exactly how this all gets applied, but I do think it's something that we should look into and make sure that people who are really important parts of the community, which are these generational community members, stay and are active and are, as a single community, we all become incentivized to grow together, and we don't wind up taxing people out. So I think this is really important. I'll just say honestly, I don't know enough about it, so Erica, I'd love to learn any information you have. These are the kind of things that would be really helpful to me to have some outside education, because I don't know where the right tax breaks are, et cetera. But
So we can
This
send
does-
you a link to Adam's presentations
Yeah,
that he did
we'll
earlier.
dig into
We
it.
may need to review them.
Because I
I'm
think
sure
these
that's
are-
a long time ago.
this is important for us to get right. That's how I feel.
So I'll put together a package of materials for you to
Okay.
review, and then we're happy to talk it through in more detail.
Yeah.
I know it's a lot of detail to throw at you at once, but and
We
maybe
gotta
set
do
up a
it.
call for anyone else who's
Yeah.
interested.
I'm willing to get into it. But there was something on the other one, not P16, the first one. What was the first one? P14.
P14 on the assessment
Was
caps.
that where we were lowering it down to age 50? And I'm not sure. I
Oh, on the
understood.
deferrals.
Yeah.
So that was on the property tax
Why would we
deferrals.
start there? And anyway, this is something that I wasn't
You don't,
sure why.
I think the thought was just to make it more accessible to a wider range of people. I mean, some people may be 59 and still be in this position of feeling like the property tax has gone way up. I don't feel like that's, it's making it hard for me to stay in the home. True, my house is a lot more valuable than it was, but I don't have access to that capital right now because it's locked up in the home. My income's a little too high maybe to be a priority for DC to be subsidizing my property taxes, but shouldn't I be able to at least postpone paying those taxes until such time as I'm ready to
Yeah,
sell? So that's the theory. I don't know if 50 is the right cut, but I was trying to be pretty generous with it.
Those are things that
It's not a, property tax deferral generally has not been well utilized, very few people use it. And it's not clear to me whether it's because it's a pretty constricted program or because people just don't want to defer their property tax. Nobody likes going into debt if they don't have to, I get
They
that.
may not understand it either.
And they may not, right, so do we need to do more outreach? Do we need to more
I
communicate?
don't have a point of view as I don't know. That's where I would say.
I would just say simpler the better.
Yeah.
I totally support, your point of view here. I definitely don't want to see people taxed out of their homes. And, simplicity might translate into higher utilization of whatever the benefit is.
I agree.
So one thing we've looked at to that end is actually doing it through the property tax itself. So you actually get the credit at the same time you're paying those property taxes. Maybe that will bring more people into the property easier.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I do think it will, we want continued development in the city. We want to continue to create jobs, and we want to do it in a way that's harmonious with legacy residents.
I think we should call it a day.
Let me wrap up. I want to just
Also, Carol
reiterate
wanted to say
something.
something.
Oh, Carol,
Not
sorry.
to interrupt you, Gregory, but just wait.
I wanted to reiterate something Mayor Williams said earlier. I think is, as usual, a very cogent point. We should just have a list of requests for congressional, federal fixes as well. And there was a time when there were responsible people up there, perhaps that's long gone, but who were willing to do constructive things with a city that they could work with. And so there are a couple things we can propose that would probably find some favor, and better to have an agenda than no agenda at all. So I would just keep a separate list.
Carol, Carolyn, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, just one comment. I want to echo, go back to Mayor Williams' comment about the use of the term racial justice, and particularly when it comes to disparities. We do know that we're talking about wealth creation, and we want to create wealth across all sectors and all people in the district. So I think the use of the term racial justice has not been well for us. I don't think our rationale that we provided with each of the proposal has been either strong or compelling. But I think our job in terms of being commissioners, if we would just think about the humane equity of what our job is, it might serve us better.
That's
Thank
great,
you.
Carolyn, thank you
Like
for that. Well, as always, an action-packed meeting.
Dave, if you want to have a separate conversation about B5, about PL 86272 on that one too. So let me know now. All right, thanks, everybody.
Nice.
This is the 30th.